Welcome to our Tuesday tips. I'm Tony Lee. We also have Ben Washburn and Katie Jarvis. The three of us are part of the Jordan Behavior Assistance Team, and we work with schools to support student behaviors. We're so happy to host this week's Tuesday tips on ending power struggles. So, some questions to start. Do you focus on winning more than teaching a new behavior? Do you feel angry, emotional, or hopeless? Does your child or student go from 0 to nuclear in seconds? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, then you have experienced coercion at play. And before we can understand how to address power struggles, it's important to understand how problem behavior develops in children. So Gerald Patterson, he was a researcher out of the University of Oregon, go Ducks. And during his time there, he wanted to know how aggressive behavior develops in children. And what he found was non-compliant behavior, so that's not following directions on the part of the child, and inconsistencies with the delivery of consequences in adults. So those two things led to a greater likelihood of aggressive behavior in children. And to illustrate this, we have the coercion cycle. And it starts with either a parent or a teacher request. So we'll use the scenario of a parent. So Johnny, clean up your room, please. That's step one. The child's response to that request is to ignore. So the adult gives the request, the child ignores. So at that moment that you give the request, they continue playing on their video game. So the adult's response is to repeat that request. So step 3, and it's usually done with a positive spin. So Johnny, if you clean your room, you can have some ice cream after dinner. So it's an incentive. So if you do this, then you're going to get a positive. The child's response is sometimes they continue to ignore or delay, or sometimes they flat out say no. I don't want to, you can't make me, I'm not going to. So at this point, the child is escalating and the adult's escalating too. So at step 5, you have where the parent makes a threat. So Johnny, if you don't clean your room, then you're not going to go to Lake Powell with us next week. And this is usually what we call the Disneyland threat. It's a threat that you make in the moment. It's usually a big threat that you're not going to follow through, but in the moment you need the child to comply. So if you don't, you're not going to Lake Powell with us next week. Even though both you and the child know that's not something you're going to follow through, you need them to comply. But this is a threat that hasn't been taught. This is a consequence that hasn't been taught to the child. And that's when the child goes nuclear. So step 6. This is when the chairs go flying, the fun, colorful language comes out. This is when the child is now in full outrage. And usually what happens in step 7 is that 60% of the time, the parent gives up altogether. So they remove the request. What they're trying to get at right now is pain control, right? What can I do to stop the nuclear explosion? So 60% of the time. So that means the child knows if I do X, Y, and Z, I have a greater than 50% chance that I can get out of the initial request altogether. 60% chance. That is known as random reinforcement. Maybe I will, maybe I won't get out of the request. But it's worked before, it's worked with grandma, it's worked with the babysitter, so I'm going to try my luck. And what we find is that over time, children engage in this behavior and they're exposed to less demands. Now, this model shows a child engaging in behavior in order to escape. But along the way, they're also getting a lot of attention from the adult. One last point that I want to make about coercion is this shows escape and attention, but coercion is also at play in the grocery store. So think about that child that is tantruming for a candy bar and mom says, no, you can't have it. No, 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 no. And then the child goes nuclear screaming for it. And the mom goes, okay, you can have it this time, but next time you're not going to have it. That's coercion too, in order to access the tangible. So now that we understand how problem behavior develops, let's talk about some strategies to end the power struggle.
Afternoon, everybody. This is Ben. So yeah, let me follow up on a couple things related, and some of it will be overlap with what Tony was saying. I think probably we all know that in this instance, the old adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is probably, highly applicable. That once we're in that cycle, in the power struggle, we don't necessarily have nearly the options we'd like, or as many as we do on the flip side up front. So on your screen there, you'll see a picture of a couple people engaging in a tug of war. And I think the idea here is, don't pick up the rope, don't engage. So related to that, a couple ideas so we don't engage or start into that coercion cycle. One idea is probably, at least in a lot of cases, the person who we may engage in that power struggle knows us pretty well, probably our student or a child. And some of them are very adept at understanding or knowing what gets our goat, what gets under our skin, pushing our buttons, so to speak. So a lot of times they may go ahead and try to get a response out of us. So a couple things related to that, the idea of knowing what your buttons are, because I guess what we don't want to do is when they push our buttons, what we don't want to do is engage and respond and reinforce their efforts. So one idea is then to do some self-inventory. Think about what it is, what tends to set me off, what are kind of my weaknesses. Is it, it could be a variety of things, right? It could be loud noises or complaining or a child threatening. I don't want to be embarrassed in front of other people. Again, whatever it is, and think about what are my personal ones. And if the child begins to try to push my buttons, how will I respond? How can I ignore, or can I ignore? What can I tell myself so that it doesn't bother me as much, or so that I don't react and reinforce that behavior? So some pre-planning there in terms of knowing my buttons. And then, on the screen, you'll also see keep your poker face. The idea of don't let them see us sweat. It's blood in the water. The sharks start to circle more. But I want to keep my keep my cool and not begin to engage. So there's some things I may want to do in terms of redirection or whatever. but don't pick up the rope, stay calm, don't let our buttons get pushed, and move on. So anyway, there's some other things to get into there, and but let me just go to the next slide here. One of our best options, again, back to prevention, is setting some limits. And personally, I like the idea of this phrase: "Say what you do what you say." And I guess in my mind, limit setting is always an appropriate thing to do. And in this instance, we're not really talking about setting limits as a punishment per se, although that may be part of it, because we're going to be talk about if-then scenarios with the child. But really, this is a way to offer choices, to have some flexibility, but that we do have some boundaries. So 3 points there, three bullet points I think that are helpful for us to keep in mind. Keeping our limits clear and simply stated, easy to follow rules, make for more predictable behavior. And I guess when we're talking in this context, that's generally a good thing, right? The more those rules are clear and defined, the more likely the student or the child is to do what we hope that they will do. So then point 2, making our limits reasonable for the situation and the person with whom we're interacting. I think, to me, this, personally, this is where I have the hardest time. I think in the moment, when we're dealing with a problem behavior, it can be really frustrating, it can be stressful. Sometimes the adrenaline gets going. And I know my tendency has been to overreact. This is like Tony was saying, this is where I, maybe it's kind of a low intensity type of problem behavior, but my reaction is to ground my 9-year-old through high school and no senior prom. I overreact, and in the moment, I'm making or offering a consequence that isn't going to be productive. And really, probably a lot of times, one of the things we'll do is we'll put out a consequence that sort of punishes me too. In school, a lot of times we'll see this, hey, if you don't get your work done, you have to stay in from recess business, which sometimes can be effective. But one of the challenges with that, or staying after school, is it's a consequence for me or the teacher as well, because that was my free time, or that's when I was going to get some work done. So setting it in terms of reasonable, that it's something that, I guess to the next bullet point, that if we do give that consequence, that we will enforce it because it doesn't punish me, or I'm willing to do that. And so that we're consistent, so that when we have said what we're going to do, then we follow through and we do what we say, and we're consistent that way. So I think another point there, in the moment, and Tony pointed this out too, in the moment, trying to come up with a reasonable consequence that we're actually going to be able to enforce is sometimes pretty tough. So I think one option that we can try and exercise, that we may not always be able to do, but is to pre-plan consequences. So I might have the opportunity or take the opportunity to sit down with the child and talk about their concerns, my concerns. Probably if we have some consistent issues with power struggles, it's an ongoing thing. Maybe. So anyway, sitting down and talking about what would be a reasonable response offers the child some level of control through their input. They might be more likely to follow through or comply with that. But it certainly helps that I don't have to then try and come up with it in the moment. And I think that's less stressful. And again, it's going to probably be more reasonable and enforceable for us, so that we have that consistency with our limits and things. So I guess, yeah, kind of my sales pitch is that idea of, or maybe, I don't know, if you guys heard of Stephen R. Covey, maybe he's a little bit older. I listened to him once, and one of the things he said, and I thought this was personally kind of harsh, he was talking about organization and planning, and he said, if you fail to plan to fail. And I don't know, I feel like that probably has some applicability here, that to the best, we obviously can't pre-plan for every circumstance, right? But if there's certain triggers, certain times, certain issues that we encounter, then if we do try and take some time, like we said, in terms of limit setting, that we may be able to save ourselves and some headache and be more successful in getting the behavior we want from the child, as well as avoiding some of the potential power struggles. So that's what I got for you. Yeah, real quick, just back to what Tony was saying, and I think I've kind of highlighted this as well, that when you're in the middle of a escalated incident or episode or the power struggle, that's really a problematic time to try and figure out how to respond. So back to that pre-planning idea. So I think that's all we've got for you guys today. Unless we do one other option. We had talked about the idea of what's called behavior momentum and how that can help us out. So maybe, yeah, I guess we can take a minute, and Katie's going to talk about that for a couple minutes.
Yep, I'll just go through that really quick. This goes along with the cycle that Tony was talking about and how to avoid that. When you try to confront a child who's escalated, a lot of times you're not going to be able to get the desired behavior that you want. So what we want to do is try to get your child to comply with a smaller or more likely request, something that's really easy to do, something that is easy to say yes to for them. Then we can do a few of those simple tasks. And by the time you get to the more challenging task, they will be more likely to do it because they're already in that chain of saying, yes, this is something that I want to do. So that's a really simple way that you can try to avoid that cycle, that coercion cycle that Tony was talking about, by starting just small, simple tasks leading up to the more challenging and more demanding task. And you can hit next. I think there's steps. Yep, perfect. So what you want to do is, the first step is identify the appropriate behaviors that the child is likely to perform most of the time. This is something that's really easy. A lot of times we do really easy things like touch your nose, touch your ears, something that the child is really more likely to do. And again, we'll ask them to do that 2 to 3 times, 2 to 3 different requests that are really easy to comply to. And then we will make sure that we are praising and reinforcing them for doing the smaller behaviors, and then go into asking for that more challenging task. So I think that's all we have for behavior momentum. You're muted, Tony.
Okay, just to summarize what we've talked about in this session. So we learned how problem behavior develops in the coercion cycle. We talked about setting limits, which involves pre-planned consequences that have been taught to the child, and then using behavior momentum in order to elicit the desired behavior. So this page right here, this is our contact information. You can reach out to us directly via phone, email, or you can access our Jordan Behavior Assistance Team, also known as JBAT. You can access our website that is full of different materials. So we'll take just a minute. If there's any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, if not, we'll go ahead and wrap this session of Tuesday Tips up. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we hope to join Tuesday Tips as a guest speaker again soon. Thank you so much.